Welcome to today's webinar, Managing Third-Party Risks in a World of Breaches. My name is Jessica Brown and I will be your moderator. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. On the call today, we have a WebEx tech. Should you have any technical difficulties, please send a message via the Q&A panel. You may also dial 1-866-779-3239 and receive technical support. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. This event is being recorded. A recorded version of this webinar will be made available on the HITRUST website. At the conclusion of the webinar, we will hold a Q&A session. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop-down as all panelists. We will address as many questions as time permits. Following today's webinar, we will provide the deck, recording, and any supporting documents mentioned throughout the event. Michael, I will now hand it over to you to start introductions.
Great, thanks, Jess. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning or this evening, depending upon where you are in the world. Shyam and I are very excited to talk to you about this industry-agnostic global challenge, which is third-party risk management. I am Michael Parisi. I am the Vice President of Business Development and Adoption here at HITRUST. I've been here at HITRUST about 4 years. Prior to that, 22 years consulting experience. And my role here is to evaluate our current programs and figure out how to make them better for organizations that are leveraging them, and then also determine new programs that we should be standing up to address common security and privacy challenges. And most of that time is focused in the third-party risk management space. So I'll hand it to my colleague, Shyam, next.
Hi, Mike. Thanks
Shyam,
very much.
There you go.
Thanks.
All right.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. So I think it's a great honor to be on the same panel with you. This is a wonderful topic that we've selected for today. Regarding myself, I'm basically the Vice President for Risk, Compliance, and Audit Services at Quantum Security, lead the engagement with all our customers, basically go to the market, foray into and trying to understand what exactly the customer needs are in the market, work extremely closely with Mike and his colleagues at the HITRUST side to ensure that the services that we are offering is completely aligned to the marketplace out here. As a part of a lot of discussions that we've basically been having with customers, one of the biggest challenges that customers are facing is in the area of third-party risk management. And the topic today is very critical, very potent, very topical at this point of time, and current, I will basically put it as we say. So before we jump into the entire discussion today, let me just cover the agenda as to what we basically want to talk about today. So we'll give you a brief introduction of ourselves. We'll talk about how partners such as Quantum basically are playing a critical role in the market out here by helping customers implement certain solutions, adopt HITRUST, adopt the HITRUST approach, and meet their requirements out there. We'll be talking about the HITRUST approach. Mike basically is an authority in that area, and we are really lucky to have him on board over here to sort of walk us through the entire thing. We'll look at the challenges, opportunities, and end up with the conclusion and question answers. What we want to take away from today's discussion on the next slide is that we look at the main learning objectives. I want to basically ensure that when we basically walk away, we've understood the critical needs for third-party risk management, because there are some obvious ones. We want to make sure that the other latent needs are also sort of visible to us as we basically decide on the need. We look at the entire methodology on what it actually should be and how it is, and in what way we as users can actually implement the existing solutions. Look at the entire HITRUST assessment exchange and see as to how do you take the next steps to get started on this journey. With this, I basically come to the actual topic and the reason of why we basically are, here today. So if we really look at it, I think the last 1.5, 2 years have been extremely, I, I would say, happening in terms of the type of damages that certain types of threat actors have been able to sort of create in the marketplace. We have been hearing of, certain data breaches in the environment, especially in the Asia Pacific region, and we have a large audience from Asia Pacific today. And it has been consistent. It has been very much visible throughout, and we can very easily say that as over the last 18 to 24 months, we have seen a very gradual but very predictable increase, a continuous increase of the average cost of breaches in the environment. We are also seeing that the entire criticality of data breaches, the threats basically has remained, and it has consistently, cyber attacks and data fraud have actually consistently remained in the top 10 risk factors in the Asia Pacific region, and of course globally also. And when we look at the cyber attacks in the region, the continuous growth of cyber attacks across the region, the continuous increase in the number and the damages that basically have actually happened through these has actually led to this cyber attacks and the threats of data fraud becoming amongst the biggest concerns in the region. I think there has been absolutely no letdown in that particular space. Organizations, we see a trend of spending a lot more trying to protect themselves and taking care of things. Whether it is Singapore, whether it is Indonesia, whether it is Malaysia or Thailand, Australia, Japan, we are seeing a consistent concern about cyber attacks and the type of breaches that they're facing actually. The damages have been increasing. In fact, if I were to sort of, go specifically into some events that actually happened in the next slide, I'll talk about it. Some specific events that have actually happened over the last 6 months or so, I think it has been even more damaging. We have consistently seen huge data breaches in some very large, diverse organizations across the last 6 to 7 months. We've seen a huge data breach in a very large online, well-known grocery shopping services. If we have seen it in a telecom agency, we have seen it in a large national airline, we have seen it, in an online job portal type of an organization, and even we have seen it in of all the organizations, a large security organization actually. And one consistency, so if one looks at these examples, there are two things that are very important takeaways. One, of course, is that these have actually happened across the industry. It's not a particular type of an organization or industry which is being targeted. It is just across, and everybody is at risk. The second thing, in each of these examples that I basically highlighted, is that the breach actually happened through either a third party, a vendor, a partner, in all those cases. So a organization may have the best, so the organization may have the best possible posture itself. It may have invested humongously in securing its environment. It may have got all these certifications. But if its partners, if vendors are basically not secured and that risk is not fully known, I think that poses a huge amount of challenge, and that is the area that we want to sort of see as to what is the best way to address it, what is the best way to plug it, if I can say so. The Mike is there on board over here. He'll basically really give us some great insights. He has a depth of experience which his young look does not basically let us know about it. But yeah, so going to the next slide, if I were to look at it, this is a slide which talks about quantum itself. So quantum security focuses on helping our customers to manage their third-party risks in a variety of ways. We basically help organizations along the entire roadmap, including helping them to get certified, including helping them to get their vendors, partners certified, and our role is quite comprehensive. While we'll touch upon the specifics of how the high trust approach and the methodology helps in this entire process, there are quite a few areas which basically need to be managed along with it and make it a more comprehensive program. And from that perspective, there are a few areas where Quantum actually comes in and adds that extra additional value. If I were to basically put it, one of the most important areas is that the third-party risk management is an area where, which is a full life cycle. It starts much before when the actual process starts, and it completes and has to be done on a continuous basis throughout actually. So managing the full life cycle and helping you completely on each step of the way is a critical aspect that Quantum takes care of. As I mentioned, the process actually starts much before. So Quantum actually, we as an organization come in, help in assessing your current situation, what are the type of things you're doing currently, and ensuring that your exact needs are established. So that's a focus area for us actually, because unless we've actually established the correct needs, unless we have ensured that even though we have the best particular platform, the best particular approach that is available to us, how do we ensure that that is aligned and customized to meet your organization's needs actually? So this is a very important part, because you got to basically start it right, go in the right direction, so that you're not ending up in a very divergent scenario or situation. Every organization today, however organized, however structured it may be, typically will always have different departments with different types of priorities, different types of thought processes, existing practices, etc. I think a very important role of a managed services provider in this particular space is to ensure that we are able to help facilitate that entire risk awareness and acceptance within your organizations. That's another very strong area where the role of a partner and managed services partner is overlooked actually, because being able to sort of have that independent oversight to ensure that that alignment actually happens, the acceptance happens, and a organization-wide support for the program actually is ensured, it becomes a very critical thing, and that's another area. Once the entire assessment for, when we basically, I'm using certain terms a little in advance over here, but please bear with me. When we've actually done a third-party risk assessment for partners, vendors, third parties, typically that's not the end of the situation. Typically you'll have a visibility and a posture, but there may be a requirement to do certain things. And one can actually go a little beyond, because certain organizations which are really large organizations typically also take on this responsibility of saying that, hey, how do I, as a social responsibility in a slightly different way, how do I basically ensure that my partners are all able to sort of up their game and progress along their maturity curves? In those type of situations, you may want to make sure that they basically are able to sort of remediate their issues, gaps. They are able to sort of adopt certain practices, best practices from the industry in a very uniform way across the entire ecosystem, and they, if required, they basically are able to get certified or assessed using some standard high trust type of methodology actually. So that basically ensures that the loop is closed and there is a continuity and a completeness in the entire process. And of course, by doing this, making sure that organizations have a integrated continuous view of the ecosystem, it becomes very critical. And this is more important when you are basically going to complement your third-party risk management solution with a lot of other security solutions to gain a complete 360 degrees view of your environment. So in summary, the role that a partner like Quantum as a managed services partner would actually play becomes a very, very complementary role to both high trust as well as to the customer organization itself, and it becomes a, I would say, a three-pronged approach for success actually. I think I hope that's a correct way of putting it, Mike. And with that, I'll just invite you to sort of take over the next set of points.
I appreciate that, Shyam. Jess, if you can move us to the next slide. I think you teed it up perfectly. And one of the things that we always like to highlight is when we talk about the challenges associated with third-party risk management, it extends well beyond just performing assessments, right, and performing audits. To your point, there's many different aspects of evaluating a current third-party risk management or vendor risk management program. There's many aspects to standing up a program to the extent that we don't have one. And there's many aspects to understanding the different life cycle components of that program, right, in terms of what you highlighted. So everything from a due diligence, vendor vetting process, how do we understand the risk associated with the relationship before we let it in the door of our organization. Once we make the business decision to enter into a business relationship, what do we need to do during the onboarding process to make sure we understand, Shyam, some of the things that you highlighted, the risk that we are accepting, right, relative to our tolerance, and what are the additional things that we need to do in order to address that risk that we are accepting. And once they are part of our ecosystem, how do we evaluate them on an ongoing basis? So it is quite complicated, and there are a number of solutions to actually make it more efficient and more effective. But I couldn't agree more. It's very critical to work with a partner that understands all the inputs into that life cycle. So even in leveraging a program like ours that we're going to take you through, which is a managed service to help you evaluate and understand the risk associated with your third-party population, further address that risk in the form of risk assessments and potentially assessments, that is just one component of the equation. And it is important that you have a partner working with you, and we encourage you to do so, to understand the inputs necessary in order to leverage such a program. And probably most importantly, Shyam, what you concluded with is once you receive the results from such a program, what do you do with it, right? How do you make decisions relative to the information that you're receiving? So I think you teed it up very well. I think it's a good segue into what I would refer to as a industry agnostic, a really globally agnostic challenge that we're all facing. Recognizing that there may be some focus or unique challenges to particular areas of the world, like in the Asia-Pac region, that may be greater than other areas of the world. That really doesn't matter. When we reduce it to the challenges that we have and the risk that we're trying to address, Shyam introduced a lot of very interesting statistics relative to challenges that organizations have faced within that region of the world. But however, those challenges are not unique to just that region of the world, but however, certainly relevant, right, to that region of the world. The other thing I thought that was interesting, and Shyam and I talked about this last night as we were preparing to discuss this with you folks today, is that you notice it's across multiple different industries, right? We're talking about the technology space. We're talking about the service space. For any of you folks that have been monitoring what's been going on here within the United States, our critical infrastructure, right, is now at risk. So it's not just focused on one particular industry. It is industry agnostic. As I take you through this slide, I'm going to cover this very quickly. Many of you are probably familiar with what we refer to as the high trust approach and a number of the different resources and programs that we have available. Where we started was at the highest level, if you will, the 10,000-foot view, and we're going to come down and zoom into this specific challenge that is third-party risk management. However, I will highlight we've got a number of programs that are available to help you manage risk more broadly across your organizations and more efficiently and more effectively. And a lot of these programs and methodologies are leveraged as part of our third-party assurance program and our managed service. It is the High Trust Assessment Exchange that we're going to take you through. Probably the most critical one is that first one, which is the High Trust CSF. That is our controls-based risk management framework. So it is a comprehensive yet scalable framework. It includes upwards of 46 different authoritative sources. When we say authoritative sources, we mean different regulations, other control frameworks, other risk management frameworks, and other standards that have been harmonized within one set of requirements. And the idea is that if you as an organization implements and adopts that framework, you'll be able to satisfy the requirements across multiple authoritative sources. And the same holds true for your business partners and for your third parties. That's a critical foundational component to our third-party assurance program, our third-party risk management methodology, and the High Trust Assessment Exchange. So Jess, maybe we can quickly go to 9, the next slide, please, and let's talk a little bit, that's perfect, about the need for third-party risk management. Shyam highlighted a lot of this, right, and especially in his comments, say when you look at some of the most recent events that happened in recent years, many of those have been tied to third-party relationships. Why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. It's much easier to manage our own house and our own shop and our own company, if you will, than it is to manage what's going on in somebody else's place of business, right, naturally. And the fact is that the number of business relationships that we are entering into as organizations is only increasing. And unfortunately, the resources and the staff and the time that we have available to manage those relationships is not increasing at the same pace as the number of relationships that we are taking on from an organizational perspective. Hence the challenges that we have in standing up and operating a third-party risk management program. Why are we being asked to do this? Well, there's multiple drivers that is really making us do additional efforts as it relates to third-party risk management. And Jess, if we can go to the next slide for a minute, please. Let's talk about, in the upper left-hand corner, first and foremost, the fundamental shift as it relates to services and operations. I think I would say we're getting more intelligent as organizations in recognizing what our core competencies are. And as a result, we're focusing on those core competencies and taking the other areas that maybe other organizations can do faster, better, and less expensive than us, and giving those to business partners to operate on our behalf. So the good news is we're focused on what we're good at. The bad news is we're losing control, right, day in and day out. The more that we give those services and functions to other organizations, naturally the less control that we have. Therefore, there's a greater demand to get increased information and transparency into what's going on with those relationships, absent us having the control over those functions. As we move to the right-hand side, naturally, the cyber threat landscape is changing by the second, or in today's day and age, the millisecond, if you will. And as more and more vulnerabilities get introduced into the world, we're constantly asking ourselves and having to ask our business partners, what are they doing in order to address these new risks and threats that are being introduced to us from an organizational perspective and to society. And what's interesting is a lot of the stakeholders that are asking those questions lie outside of your traditional information security function. They've been asking those questions and they've been focused on that for a number of years. But now other stakeholders, other members of senior management board level members, potential investors within our organizations are starting to ask those questions around how are you going to address cyber threats and cyber risks. And as new things come up, how do we ensure we are addressing those from an organizational perspective? But more importantly, how do we make sure our third parties and our vendors are addressing them appropriately? And in today's day and age, it's not just about who is our direct vendor or business partner, but who are they using in order to provide the service that we're using our third party for or for our vendor for. So the conversations are extending into fourth party and fifth party relationships. On the bottom left-hand side, lots of confusion around what we should be asking for. What is sufficient in order to provide us the appropriate level of comfort relative to good security and privacy posture? And that confusion is oftentimes driven by other stakeholders that may not understand what they're asking for, what they should be asking for. Contractual terms that can be very confusing relative to types of audits or assessments that we should be performing. Contractual terms that are confusing that we agree to as third parties and business partners and vendors because we want the business. And that level of confusion is leading us down a path where many organizations are requesting inappropriate levels of assurance from their third parties. And lastly, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's obviously an increased level of risk and liability associated with these relationships. The regulators have zero tolerance when it comes to the lack of diligence and the lack of monitoring that we are performing over our third party. So all of those, in addition to a number of other factors, but we see these as the main drivers, is increasing the need for third-party risk management. I think you see that manifesting itself in the form of multiple regulations across the world and across many different countries. So Jess, if we go on to 12, let's spend a minute defining this concept of third parties, because I think this is important. When we talk about third parties, although not all third parties are created equal, and all vendors are considered third parties, there are other types of relationships and organizations that are considered third parties that may not be considered vendors. So the point of this, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but broaden your horizons as it relates to how you think about these types of business relationships. I think many organizations have a tendency to focus on who are we exchanging funds with. They may go to the AP system and say, who are we paying invoices to? And that becomes our population of third parties. Well, although that is correct, that is one subset of organizations that you should be considering. There's many more as we try and reflect on this slide here. Think about those organizations that you're sharing information with that are not necessarily giving you money for a service. Research institutions. You know, Sean mentioned the example of, for example, like a recruiting or a job search organization. I had a call with one of those this morning. They said 90% of their business partners, there's no exchange of money. It's just exchange of data and sensitive information, right? So broaden your horizons when you think about this concept of third parties, and make sure you're starting larger as opposed to smaller when you're trying to evaluate the risk associated with the total population. Don't worry, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to perform a giant assessment against all of these organizations. As long as you leverage a methodology that guides you in the direction to understand which ones will introduce the highest level of risk, then you'll know for certain which ones you should be evaluating and which ones you should not be evaluating. So start larger, narrow it down, as opposed to starting smaller and figuring out sometime down the line there's somebody we should have included that we did not include. Which brings us to our next slide. Common challenges associated with third-party risk management. These are general challenges, right? Industry agnostic, globally agnostic, and I won't go through all of them, but as our audience looks at all of these points here that we've summarized on this slide, I'm sure at least one, if not all, will resonate with you in some shape or form. And they may be pain points at different points within the life cycle of third-party risk management. For example, a lot of organizations may have a very strong due diligence process in place, right? They know exactly what they're doing in evaluating a third party before they agree to enter into a relationship with those organizations. Same thing on maybe the onboarding process. However, once that third party gets in the door, the focus of that relationship kind of falls off, if you will, right? And the focus on continuing to evaluate that relationship and think we did a one and done type activity oftentimes happens within many organizations. Then there's the opposite of that. Many organizations have a very strong process in place whereby they're evaluating third parties on a periodic basis. However, they start that process once the business hands over to them the relationships that they've already entered into. And they may not even be part of the front-end process of performing diligence and evaluation. And then there's some that have strong processes on both sides of the equation or multiple sides of the equation or during the life cycle, but they're looking for ways to automate it, make it more efficient, make it more effective. In our years of experience within this space, these are generally the most common challenges that we have come across in talking to organizations within this space. I'm going to highlight three for you. First and foremost, the first one. That is the first one, not by accident, but by design. And this concept of understanding the risk profile associated with a relationship is probably the number one challenge that every organization is faced with. And I go back to my example of a population of third parties. Not all third parties are created equal. The risk associated with that relationship is going to depend upon a number of different factors. How much data are they obtaining from us? Do they have offshore operations? Are they using subcontractors, et cetera, et cetera? All of those things are important to understand the risk profile, which is ultimately going to help us determine what level of assurance or how much we should be doing or how much we should not be doing based upon the risk associated with that third party. Most organizations struggle with that. They apply one approach to all third parties, regardless of whether it's the vendor watering the plants within the office or the cloud service provider that's hosting all of our data. Number one challenge that we see. In the middle of the list there, organizational resource drain. When you look at the resources that are responsible for managing risk across our organization, and more specifically third-party risk, 40 to 50% of their time is spent on administrative, non-value add activities, collecting the data they need just so they can make informed decisions. Not a good use of their time. These individuals are so critical to our organization. 100% of their time ideally should be spent on making better informed risk-based decisions and starting their job with the data that they need in order to do that. Unfortunately, what we find is that most organizations are not in a position to recognize that. How do you correct that? The last one I'll highlight is the last one on the list, which is the inability to quickly vet or assess third parties before letting them enter into your ecosystem. Significant challenge for many organizations. It can take weeks or months when this is a critical business partner that you need to onboard in order to deliver a combined service to the marketplace, in order to address an unpredicted event like a global pandemic, right, from an organizational perspective. So making sure that we have a process that's very efficient and effective and scales is really important. So Jess, as we move on, you can quickly hit 14 and then go to 15, please. Let's talk about our methodology. Sham highlighted a little bit about this, and I did already as well. When you think about our third-party risk management methodology, I like to refer to it as integrated yet modular. And there's multiple components that you can pick and choose that you want to use, but it's all foundationally based on other programs that have existed for a period of time that have been leveraged globally across multiple industries that you see on the left-hand side there. One of them I already talked about, the comprehensive framework. One of the things I didn't mention that's important to highlight here is not only is it prescriptive and scalable, but from a comprehensive standpoint, in today's day and age, we may need to obtain multiple types of assurance reports from one particular business partner in order to obtain comfort over multiple things that we need to be in compliance with. For example, we may want to understand whether an organization is compliant with ISO 27001, 27002. That's one report we need to obtain and review. If they're processing credit card transactions, we may need to obtain their PCI AOC. That's another report we need to obtain and review. If they're handling PHI and doing business with the United States, HIPAA now becomes relevant. So we may need to obtain some type of HIPAA assessment that they have in place. If they're doing business in the EU, we need to understand what they're doing from a GDPR perspective. So you can see the paper stacking up that we need to review from a manual perspective. If you ask them to perform an assessment against one comprehensive framework that have all those standards included, there's only one report we need to review in order to understand whether they're in compliance with all of those aspects. The important thing about that report is that it is supported by a valid assessment methodology and assurance program. Not all assessments are created equal, so making sure it follows a substantiated industry and globally recognized assessment program and assurance program is critical to obtain those independent assurances that are executed by independent, what we refer to as assessors, for which Sham and Quantum is one of those partners of ours, that will go in and validate that not only you followed the implementation of the framework appropriately, but you've also followed the assessment methodology, providing that independent level of assurance to your stakeholders, absolutely critical. When you combine those together and use those as part of your third-party risk management program, leveraging the High Trust Assessment Exchange gives you the highest level of comfort and reliability relative to the risk that your third parties introduce into your environment. Which brings us, Jess, to the next slide. When you look at this concept of a third-party risk management methodology, as I mentioned before, there's multiple steps included within that process. And some of you have probably seen, a number of different third-party risk management methodologies in the past. Generally, I would say they have the same foundational components, if you will. It always starts with how do you initiate evaluating a third-party relationship, collect the data that you need in order to qualify them, determine whether you're going to accept that relationship or not. Who do you ultimately select? And once you ultimately select them, very important, how do you monitor them on an ongoing basis, as Sham mentioned in the beginning of our presentation, right? That continuous monitoring of those relationships. What makes our methodology unique relative to others is that we are laser focused on step number 3, which is the qualify stage, for a number of different reasons. If we don't do this correctly, the rest of our process falls apart. Think about a number of the examples that Sham introduced in the beginning of this presentation. I'm quite sure many, if not all, of those organizations had some process in place to initiate a relationship, to collect information relative to those third parties. Did they qualify them appropriately? Probably not, which means they did not do an appropriate level of diligence associated with those third parties. We see it every day. That qualify stage is absolutely critical. Where do organizations struggle, or where could they fall down within that qualification stage? It's not collecting the appropriate data, the right level of data in order to perform an appropriate risk assessment that will then guide you into how much you should be doing or not doing. So we are super focused on that from a stage perspective. Jess, if you can quickly move to 17 and then 18. I won't go through all of these points, but one of the things that Shyam and I always encourage a number of different organizations to consider is leverage what's already there. Don't try and go this alone. Don't try and recreate the wheel. Leverage your partners, your experts within the industry, and really the collection of information that's already available to you. That is the beauty of something such as an assessment exchange. There are thousands of vendors that already have transparent security and privacy information available to you. By participating within that network, you don't have to perform your own proprietary manual questionnaire and assessment to collect the same data that these third parties have provided hundreds of times over and over again. It makes no sense for any of us as a third party or as a customer. So leverage what's already there from a network perspective and really leverage the investment that other organizations have already made to provide this assurance to other stakeholders within the industry. And things such as, obviously, the high trust programs, the assessment exchange is something that's a globally recognized methodology, globally recognized assessment that provides you assurances over multiple different authoritative sources. I do want to draw your attention to that last section there. And again, I won't go through all of the points, but when you think about the return on investment and recognizing that costs associated with any managed service is very important to any organization. Think about the spend and the investment that we need to make as organizations internally. I recognize that these figures that we provided here are in US dollars, so the costs will certainly be different or vary depending upon what we're talking about from a global perspective. But I think you understand the idea. Cost of hiring full-time individuals or using our risk managers to spend their time on these non-value-add administrative activities is much more than leveraging a managed service with lower costs. So make sure you understand the cost structure of that servicing program that you're leveraging when you make those decisions. Jess, if we can go into 20 quickly, and let's go through what is this solution that I'm talking about. The High Trust Assessment Exchange is a managed service that I talked about before, and it's really designed to help you not only evaluate but operate your third-party risk management program more efficiently, more effectively, given there are the appropriate inputs to leverage that program. But somebody like Shyam and Quantum can help you identify what those inputs are necessary in order to leverage that program. It is supported by dedicated individuals and people that support your program and your organization. We give you resources, and they are dedicated to your account. This isn't like you go into a queue and when your number comes up, somebody helps you with your issues. You get dedicated resources depending upon how many third parties you have from an organizational perspective. We do a number of different functions, such as validate that the demographic information and data associated with your third-party population is complete and accurate. We will perform an inherent risk assessment across your entire third-party population, give you an annual or whatever frequency you would like risk assessment driven off of our risk triage model. 12 of the highest risk, inherent risk factors we should be collecting information on that is globally recognized from a methodology perspective. In addition to that, we will provide you with an inherent risk score, a recommended action plan that you should be following in order to obtain the appropriate level of assurance from your third parties to address the risk that's associated with that relationship that you have in place. All of that is provided as part of the service, in addition to the ongoing monitoring of your third parties relative to the risks that they introduce to your relationship. Jess, if we move to 21, some buzz terms that I'll use quickly. This is supported by people, process, and technology. I'm sure many of us have heard those buzz terms in the past. However, we, of course, have a unique perspective on this. Technology is last for a reason. We believe technology is table stakes. Everyone has technology in this day and age. Many of the providers that are offering a service relative to third-party risk management only have technology. They'll give you a platform that allows you to automate a lot of these functions, allows you to collect information, allows you to store that information. However, there's still all these things you need to do from a self-service perspective. What's our primary challenge that we're faced with? Not understanding the risk profile and limited organizational resources. So if you give me something that I don't even have the people or time to use, what good is it? Why am I paying for it? So of course we offer the technology and automation as part of this, but our true differentiator, besides the industry agnostic methodology recognized globally that's been in place for years, it is really the people aspect and the fact that we provide you the resources necessary in order to operate your program, either initially and or on an ongoing basis. I mentioned it's integrated yet modular, really important. You don't need to use all aspects of this program. You can pick and choose what you want to use. And Jess, if you can move us to the next slide. Everything is available to you. You may choose to use certain aspects of the program at certain points within the life cycle, but you don't need to use all of them. And they're all customizable in the form of process, but also in the form of templates and also in the form of the technology and the portal itself to help you address this. Let me highlight two quick things for you. Jess, if you could move to the next one. The inherent risk module is something that really differentiates our model and program within the marketplace. Again, I won't go through all aspects in terms of what it offers. This is designed to address that first challenge that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation. How do we determine what the risk profile is across our entire third-party population, not just our vendors, not just who we believe to be quote-unquote high risk? In order to do that, we need to evaluate not only the right aspects that will provide us transparency into inherent risk, but the right number of aspects as well. Oftentimes, organizations will only focus on how much money they spend with a third party in order to determine the level of inherent risk associated with that relationship. Not the best and not the right indicator. Maybe it's one thing that we are interested in, but risk really extends to so much more than just the amount of money that we're spending with a particular organization. So our inherent risk module comes standard with the program available to all organizations. And it is something that can be leveraged in an unlimited fashion, regardless of how many third parties you have, to execute on a periodic basis or to evaluate specific services and programs. Driven off of that risk triage model, 12 of the most common high-risk inherent risk factors, generating an inherent risk assessment that you can use as a defensible position to say, I have performed a risk assessment against all my third parties on a periodic basis, in addition to a detailed risk profile, an inherent risk score, and a recommended level of assurance that scales driven off of the risk that third party introduces into your organization. Template-based, we build multiple templates for you based upon the categories of third parties that you have, and also customizable. If there are specific questions that you want to ask as part of your risk assessment, we can build that into the template for you. The module that is available as part of the program in an unlimited fashion for organizations. Let's show you some quick screen prints in terms of what it looks like. So Jess, if you can move to 24. A couple things I'll highlight here on the right-hand side, and you're looking at a detailed view of what the assessment exchange provides organizations. You notice we're pointing out that summary risk score from a third-party perspective that is derived from the IRQ, the delivery mechanism to collect that information, in addition to a history of all the inherent risk assessments that have been performed and all the historical assessments against that particular third party. Jess, if you move to the next slide, please. One of the things that is very unique about this methodology that's different from other offerings within the marketplace, as you can see in the right-hand side, There's multiple levels of assurance and assessments that are available. It's not just a high trust certification. It could be a validated assessment. It could be a readiness assessment. It could be what we refer to as a rapid assessment, which helps you address that challenge of quickly vetting third parties. Although it is a self-attestation, it is a subset of the highest risk security and privacy controls and still gives you information relative to the maturity of those security and privacy programs. As you can see, our methodology will bucket and tier your third parties driven off of 5 different buckets that is based upon the inherent risk that those relationships introduce to your organization, along with a recommended action plan in the middle column there that we suggest in order to take that level of inherent risk and reduce it down to an acceptable level of inherent risk. Jess, if you move to the next slide, please. The questions or inherent risk aspects that we're asking can be routed to multiple stakeholders within your organization. This isn't just answered by your vendor. It's answered by individuals internally, but also externally from a third-party perspective. What does this do? This helps you build the profile overall, and it also ensures collaboration between you and your vendor or your third party. You're building this risk profile together, and it helps you to defend any pushback that may come down the line from a third party saying that they don't want to perform a particular type of an assessment. Jess, you can move to the next one, please. This shows you an appreciation of the routing. And also, down below, you'll notice the ability to add those customized questions that I mentioned before. The last thing that I want to mention, well, first I want to mention the assurance continuum before I get into the rapid assessment module. So, Jess, if we can go to that. One of the questions that we're often asked is, well, does this scale and do you have different types of assessments that I can apply to my third parties? And the answer is yes, we do. We think of this concept of assurance as a continuum. You want to move third parties based upon the relationship up that continuum over a period of time. More comfort, more transparency. Why? We're ultimately trying to reduce the level of effort we need to spend ourselves from an organizational perspective, or that maybe our third parties need to spend in providing information so we get the right level of transparency into their security and privacy posture. You may enter the assurance continuum at any one of these points. And underneath each one of these levels of assurance lies different types of assessments that will provide you a scaling level of assurance driven off of the relationship that you have. Again, the relationship of somebody that is watering plants within the office, you're not going to expect them to provide a full certification, but you may expect them to provide a smaller rapid assessment relative to their security and privacy posture. As opposed to a cloud service provider, you may be further along the continuum. So it scales multiple types of assessments in order to address the risk associated with that relationship. One of the mechanisms is our rapid assessment module, Jess, which is the next slide. Rapid assessment module, as I mentioned before, is meant to be a quick assessment, hence the name rapid. It is really meant to help you in the due diligence process and in the vendor vetting process. There's an electronic assessment that lives within the exchange that is delivered to you in a block of assessments driven off of your subscription tier that reset annually. Subset of the CSF controls that provides not only whether there are gaps that exist relative to those controls, but also scoring to help you understand the maturity of those programs. And we've got a few screen prints here. Jess, if you quickly move to the next one, it gives you an appreciation of what it looks like. As you can see on the right-hand side, the control elements in addition to the requirement to score against our 3x3 model. Do they have appropriate policies and procedures in place? And is that control implemented? And Jess, on the next slide, you can show a summary of what that assessment looks like in a summary view from a heat map perspective, quickly understanding where some of the deficiencies may exist within that organization, what may need to be addressed from a risk perspective. And on the next slide, Jess, you can also see a summary of all of the deficiencies that exist as part of that assessment. Anything that is only somewhat compliant or non-compliant, will trigger a deficiency that needs to be addressed by that organization. Last thing that I'll cover before we go to questions, as I see we've got about 5 minutes left, is how do you get started with such a program, which Shyam is very familiar with as one of our implementation partners. So as you move to our last slide, Jess, this gives you an appreciation of all the different things that you need to have in place in order to get started. We're averaging about 10 business days in order to get organizations stood up into the program and leveraging the program. And we're more than happy to walk through any of these steps in more detail in follow-up discussions with anybody that is interested in more information. So with that, Jess, I think we'll move to 34. And Shyam, I'll hand it to you for any questions that we may have.
Great. I think that was a great amount of information packed in such a small time. And I think, the ability for customers to use that will be wonderful. Both the combination of the platform itself, a combination of a very simple graded approach where a organization in enterprise can also sort of start off and mature its program over a period of time. And I think quite a comprehensive approach. So I'll wait for any questions. There was one interesting question which came up on chat, which was, which particular industry is this more important for? And I think we covered it right in the beginning, that the breaches that are happening and even those due to third parties are actually occurring across the industry domains. And typically, I would basically put it that way, that any industry which basically has PII or PHI would be at risk, because that's what any threat actor is after. So that's one very important area. Yep.
Yeah, Shyam, I would agree with that. And although there are certain industries that have more of a focus on this than others right now, those that don't have the focus on it just yet will soon, and they should. So to your point, Shyam, it is at every industry that needs to be focused on this.
Absolutely. Anybody having any additional specific thing, please come forth and ask. We've got Mike over here, who's like, I would basically say he's a walking, talking encyclopedia on this topic, given his vast experience, both as a personal consultant and as an advisor. I think we should leverage it actually. So why don't we wait for any questions to come up? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think I saw one, Shyam, around, can a company start on a smaller scale, say one third party at a time for this program? The answer to that is yes. We can walk or run, as quickly or as slowly as you would like. We actually suggest that you do start. We do have options available for pilot programs as well. So we do actually suggest that you start that way and you scale up where necessary. So that is something that you can certainly do. Another one was, what is the general duration of time organizations take to decipher the right data security platform for them? And do you find they're asking the right qualifying questions prior to purchase? Great question. I would tell you, in my maybe biased experience, they're absolutely not asking the right questions prior to them doing so, but that's because they don't know what they don't know. And that's really the challenge that we're trying to address through our education, is you think you're getting a platform and maybe you're asking the right questions relative to the platform, but when you don't understand the methodology and the challenges that you're being faced with, you don't even know to ask those questions to recognize that maybe that program or service is not providing that value to you from an organizational perspective. But that is a great question. Another one was, I recognize we're at time, but I'll try and alleviate these as quickly as possible. Does the parent company have the authority to request assessment information from fourth parties? The answer to that is yes. In requesting one of our assessments, one of the requirements to our assessments is that they have an effective third-party risk management program in place. And part of that, and obtaining assurances over their third-party risk management program, you will understand what they are doing with their third parties, which is effectively your fourth parties. And we're seeing a movement from some of our customers asking their third parties to participate in the assessment exchange to ensure they're getting the same level of assurance that they're asking their third parties to provide. So yes, you can absolutely do that. Is TPRM applicable only to large enterprises? Absolutely not. We have customers that have 1 to 2 third parties that are leveraging the program, and it's absolutely relevant to them. Question around who are our competitors and how do we differentiate ourselves? That's always an interesting question. I would tell you there's a lot of competitors in this space relative to the technology. Nobody provides the integrated yet modular service that we provide. Some other players in the marketplace that you'll hear of are CyberGRX, Prevalent, Wistic, and a series of others, third-party trusts that are really more focused on the technology aspect. They don't really have an industry and globally recognized methodology, nor do they have an assessment program and an assurance program, and no one is a certifying body as we are. So hopefully that addressed all the outstanding questions.
I think absolutely. I'd like to stress on the last part. I think it's very important that one could actually have a solution, which is a standalone solution for TPRM also. But the benefit or the insight that is brought into a solution, because HITRUST itself actually is a certifying body, a standards organization. I think these are two very, very important pillars of the value that is brought to the entire thing. So, and that allows third parties to go through the entire, I would say, the maturity curve. You are basically able to sort of do the IRQ, which is your inherent risk evaluation. You are able to do a very quick dipstick type of an assessment through a rapid assessment. And if you feel that people are there who need to be pursued further, then you can actually decide on a readiness assessment, or you can actually decide on a certification, which is a validated assessment. So the ability for organizations to go the entire path in a very connected fashion is possible only because HITRUST has got that background of being a standards body. It creates its own standards and a certifying body. I think that brings a tremendous amount of value, and I think that is something that Mike and you didn't stress enough actually. I think it's been a great discussion, and we've had a very, very good audience out here, very participative, I would put it that way. And I would like to, on behalf of HITRUST, on behalf of Quantum, we will basically be, sort of are very thankful for your participation, all of you over here. As I had actually mentioned in some of my discussions or my mails and invites that had gone out, of the various organizations who basically, you all can note down our addresses, that is Shyam over here and Michael over here, email addresses. Feel free to reach out to us with your specific requests. We are going to be selecting a couple of few customers or participants, attendees over here to do a free risk posture assessment for you. And we will reach out to you for with some specifics to ask a little bit about your organization and your need, and if it basically is suits and meets the criteria, we'll be more than happy to sort of do a complimentary assessment for you. This assessment is actually almost worth around $10,000. Typically the entire effort plus the entire license that basically is included. We are going to be offering it complimentary, and we look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to reach out to us and look forward to engaging with you. Thank you very much, and look forward to the next meeting.
Thank you, everyone.